Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Next Gen training, Exercising Empathy and Conflict. I'm Candace Thorson, Managing Editor at GovLoop, and this afternoon I'm also your moderator, so thanks so much for joining us. Before we get into the content today, I want to give a special thank you to our Alliance partners, Gov White Papers, WAPA, and American University, for helping us put on Next Gen training. And they also are sponsoring our upcoming Next Gen Public Service Awards. So if you're unfamiliar with them, these awards highlight you and your colleagues, so the people in government who really work hard to support and improve their agencies and enhance constituent experiences. So you can nominate your colleagues from now through July 6th. There are six different categories you can choose from, so nominate people for this or that. And you can find the nomination link in the resources tab of today's training. These are really wonderful awards, so we strongly encourage you to nominate people. Okay, on to today's topic. As much as we try to avoid it, conflict can happen at any time in the workplace. Stress, tight deadlines, different perspectives and personalities, miscommunication, all of them can lead to bouts of conflict. But instead of letting disagreement derail your day, there are skills that we can learn to approach difficulties with empathy and to work toward a resolution. So we have two experts today who are going to share with us how to handle tough conversations with care. Before we jump into that, again, I have some quick housekeeping items to go through. So if you just bear with me for a few moments. If you're on X, formerly called Twitter, please share what you learn using the hashtag NextGenGov. We have great resources available for you on the console, as always, including the link to nominate folks for the Public Service Awards. So anyway, make sure you check those out. If you want to access our closed captioning, just go to the bottom right-hand side of the media player. If you have technical problems, which we don't want you to have, but they happen, just put a message in the Ask a Question tab, and my colleague, Maddie, will help you out. And you can also use that tab, that portal, to ask questions of our experts, and they want to hear from you, so certainly feel free to put stuff in there during any time. And we also have an open chat available, so you can publicly talk with your fellow attendees. To access that, just go to the blue group chat button in the middle of your screen. And check your inbox on Thursday morning, because we're recording this training and we'll email you a link to the entire session on demand. And finally, we are giving out 1 CPE credit for your participation today. So to get the credit, you need to take all the polls, participate in the entire training, and then fill out the post-event evaluation form. So I have all that out of the way. I think I need a glass of water now, and I want to introduce our two speakers. We have Dr. Teresa Horn. She is Senior Advisor and Director for Culture and Engagement with the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, much be awfully hard to put on a business card. And TJ Espy, who is Portfolio Manager with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So I want to thank you guys for being here. We're going to start off with TJ. She has a presentation, and then we'll open it up to a fuller conversation. So go for it, TJ. Thank you.
Awesome. First, I just want to say welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this very important topic. So happy to be here. I'm going to be wearing my clinical psychology and therapy hat for this session, along with my work experience as a portfolio manager. What I manage at USDA for Food Nutrition Service is customer experience, and a lot of that has to do with human-centered design, which is, a lot of people are using it as a buzzword, but it's not really a buzzword. I would say that's, people-focused products and service. And as public servants, we have to definitely learn a little bit more empathy and making sure that we're designing things, having conversations centered around others and not just ourselves. So I'm going to kick it off like that, and you can go ahead and go with the next slide, please. All righty, so session goes for today. So we want to learn how to communicate your perspective during conflict more efficiently, gain tips on becoming an active listener, receive strategies on how to be empathetic and respectful while de-escalating a conflict, because things can get heated. And let's face it, we want to learn to work through this type of conflict instead of workplace violence, which is what that can escalate to. So we want to avoid workplace violence at all costs, learn how to, some effective strategies to do so. So before I go to the next slide, I just want to ask you, because I want this to be interactive. This is our time together as public service. So let's take this time to enjoy this session to the best of our ability. Just put in chat for me, please. So what's causing the most conflict in your workplace right now? Go ahead and put that in chat, because it's going to give us an idea like, hey, is it all the same across government, no matter state, public, city, federal, or is it different? So what's causing the most conflict right now in your workplace? And as you're typing that in chat, I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next slide. All right, so key definitions here. First off, conflict. What's a conflict? It's an active disagreement between people with opposing opinions and principles. Conflict resolution, is a discipline in itself. I'm loving this, looking at these chats at the same time as I'm chasing butterflies. So with conflict, I would definitely recommend taking a conflict management class, because you have conflict management styles, so you have to understand and determine what's your conflict management style. Is it collaborating, in which, both parties are, cooperative, which is what we should be aiming for in government? Is it competing, which is the win-lose? Competing is great in certain instances. You may be competing for budget, but you have to understand that we're here to do the work of the public. Remember, we're both servants and we pay taxes here. So all of that is very, very important. So on that competing side, we want to make sure that you're keeping competition where it belongs. On a court, have those things have an outlet. And when I say outlet, I don't mean the Nike outlet down, or, the Coach outlet. I mean an outlet to where, if you're a competitive person like me, you get on the tennis court, you go to the driving range, you make sure that you don't come to work projecting with that competitive nature and become a disruptor. And we all know disruptors in a workplace. Those are the folks that maybe they have to get their point across, but it's all the time, and we can't get through agendas in business because they are disrupting constantly. If you're that person, we love you. It's okay. We understand you're very smart and you have a great educational background, but for the sake of getting work done for the government, we have to keep it moving. So make sure you have that outlet to give you that opportunity to get rid of that competitive edge that you may have. You have compromise, and that's a middle ground. So we want to aim toward compromising and collaborating. You have accommodating. That's one party yields. Sometimes there's an instance, but hopefully we can collaborate and compromise somewhere. And then you have avoiding, and that's deliberately ignoring or just avoiding conflicts altogether. You don't want to necessarily avoid unless you're dealing with a disruptor or somebody who's very argumentative, where there's a time and place for that, but you don't want that to be all the time. So if I'm with somebody who's extremely argumentative and I want to keep my fight or flight down and just kind of keep my zen in place, I'm going to avoid certain people at certain times. Like my mom would say, that person will argue with a sign pole. We don't want to argue with sign poles around here. So you got to know when to use that right type of conflict management style. So let's go to empathy right now. So in the chat, I want to know, what does empathy mean to you? Do you see it as a positive or a negative? I'm going to pause there for a quick second. When you hear the word empathy, what are you thinking? Are you thinking sympathy? Are you thinking squishy, weak, soft? Are you thinking it's a good quality? What do you think about empathy?
The chat is fascinating, by the way.
I love the chat. I come here for the chat.
I can't keep up with the comments, but they're fascinating.
Social media, I go for the comments. Okay. So an empathy is the ability to share someone else's feelings or experiences by imagining what it will be like in that person's situation, or the old saying, walking a mile in somebody else's shoes. It's just really getting a deeper understanding of how somebody else may feel about something or their views. In America, besides the natives, we all come from somewhere else. We represent different cultures, different work cultures, different, ethnic backgrounds. We're different. We have different ways of doing things, right? So it doesn't mean there's always a right or wrong. There's different. Now, the right is we have certain policies and statutes and things that we have to follow ethically and just to make sure we can get our work done. But then there's perspective type of things, like, hey, you may think it should be done like this. I think it's done like that, but we're different, So in the design world, human-centered design world, we do a lot of empathy mapping where we literally become one with who we're, the crowd, the targeted audience that we're trying to create products and services for. On the corporate side, it's important. We're being studied all the time. You always get targeted ads, do you not? People are studying you. So we can take that opportunity outside of that corporate mindset and make sure we're empathizing with the people that we work with. That's just taking a few seconds just to understand. The big picture to this is right now, a lot of researchers feel like we are at an empathy deficit here in America. Studies some years back showed that only about 25% of college kids were empathetic, which is not too good. About 25%. So we're not taking that time, Are we desensitized by so many bad things happening that now we just created this big callus around us and we're just hardened, where it's rise of the id. What's the id? It's that, it's ego, me, myself, and I, even though I love that song, but with the rise of the id and self-focus and self-interest, sometimes we're forgetting to remember others. So let's keep the id down. It's good to take pride in who you are, and ego is important in its place, but balance is everything. Balance is life. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm gonna ask you a quick question just to see where we're at. And I bet you guys aren't gonna get this one. We'll see. According to research, what state has the most empathetic citizens? Is it
This
Alabama?
Is interesting because every time there's a question, any question about a topic where you have to guess which state is what, I always get it wrong.
Exactly, because you never know, right? We're all loyal to our own states and where we're from, but in these instances, we're like,
yeah, mine isn't on here. Just saying.
A lot of people are putting Alaska, right? It's so beautiful up there. I just want to go hang out with a moose. Just kidding. I don't want to get kicked by one. Sometimes they're standing outside the door. They're
big,
a big threat
by the way. I've been to Alaska and moose are big.
They are. They're huge. They don't appear that way when you're seeing them on holiday, little heads moving with, little lights hanging from their hair. Nah. They're a big threat.
Yeah.
All righty. So are we wrapped up yet?
We'll give everybody like 20 more seconds. So if you want to just make sure you, put in an answer, that would be great.
Okay. 20 more seconds to go. Keep going for those of you putting things in the chat. One folks said Massachusetts. They said, forget these options. I'm going with Massachusetts, baby.
Okay, I'll put up the results now.
Okay.
Alaska.
All righty. So most people said Alaska, and it's beautiful. You have beautiful people there. But the answer is actually Rhode Island. Go figure, that little tiny, tiny state. So you're right, Candace, it's always like that. So, and they took, with this research, they weighed out a lot of different factors, like how people interact. And, they do a lot of research around what people think about major topics. Are we tone deaf? A lot of folks think that here in America, we lack empathy because a third of the people felt like racism didn't exist, according to a Gallup study. So things like that, you're like, what do you mean there's racism here? What are you talking about? Excuse me for the sound. Next slide, please. All righty, so now we're gonna go a little deep now into effective communications during conflict, because we're gonna have them. We're gonna have conflict every single day for a certain amount of time. Conflict is going to take us away. Conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. Conflict is very healthy. It's not the conflict because we're going to have different opinions, right? I don't want to be a Stepford wife. We're getting into that robot stage. I'm very techie and I love to read about research, and China is really big on creating these awesome, real looking robots. But imagine if we were all the same and all had the same opinion. I'm sorry, but I would be bored out of my mind. Okay. So conflict is healthy. It's just about how we deal with conflict. Okay. So First thing you want to do is cool off and reflect before engaging. Take that time to think about it. Think before you speak. You hear those things, but we don't necessarily do them. As we get seasoned in life, we take that time. But I can recall, in my feisty times coming into the workforce, that little firecracker was like, bam, whatever I thought, I said it. Not a good practice, not necessarily good. So take that time. Or if you're one of those folks like me that like to type the heated email that you would like to say, make sure you're doing a Word and not an Outlook and accidentally send it. And then you end up, packing up your box. Everybody's like, where are you going? You're going on vacation. No, I'm fired. All right. So gather information required to support your stance on a matter. So make sure you do your research, get your facts together. Because though empathy is about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes to understand their point of views, you don't want to always say, well, I feel. Feelings are great, but make sure that you have facts, regs, whatever you're trying to justify, that you have something to back where you're at, because some things are relative. Some things are, definitely based on your perception. And I'm going to pause and say a lot of conflict is expectation management. Right? You're expecting this colleague or this person to behave this way, and they're behaving that way. So a lot of what we do as therapists is we work on expectation management. Okay. Something didn't go right in life. You didn't get the promotion you wanted. You didn't get the bride or the groom that you wanted. You didn't get the house. So now you're walking around with a poopy lip, because things that just didn't pan out the way that you wanted them to pan out. It's the same thing in a workplace. We're expecting people to behave and do things a certain way and be civil, right? That's common sense. They should know. What's common sense these days? Let's be real. What's common sense? We got to get rid of that common sense stuff. Nothing's common these days. We're all different. So take that time to gather that information and make sure that it's not all feelings what you feel. Take a deep breath before you respond. Just woosah, stick to the facts. Like I said, the actual instances. And make sure when you're speaking, be it if it's just another colleague or a supervisor, your supervisor, conclude with something positive, making sure you discuss what was done well and the benefits. It's a lot of benefits to that congruence. Like, I love when you wrote out this part of the policy that you said X, Y, Z, but I had an issue right here because an X, not just because, well, I wouldn't have done it that way. Oh, no. And we're not even, you just want to make sure that, like I said, that compromising, right? That either you're compromising or you're collaborating to get to the best solution. We're not in corporate. I love corporate. It's that trip you in the hallway type of mentality. But here on the government side, we have to work for the better good of everybody else. So it's a little bit different. I'm going to pause right here and see if Dr. Horn has anything to add here.
Thank you so much. No, I feel like in terms of effective communication during conflict, the only thing that I would add is to really think about not only the message that you're trying to get across, but the message that you're trying to learn, right? It's the problem that you're trying to get to, not the person. And so many times we get caught up in the person. They feel this way. They don't like this thing. You're tying it to an individual versus what the actual issue in the conflict is. So if you guys aren't agreeing on a particular thing at work, then it's really to think about, is this thing that we are disagreeing on at work, why do they feel this certain way about this project or issue or disagreement? And then you try to see their side. So I think that's the biggest piece that sometimes we miss, is that we want to speak to the person and tell them what they do and don't like or what they are thinking, instead of actually looking at the problem and the issue. And once we do that, we start figuring out their why. Why do they feel the way they do about that particular thing that we disagree on? And then you may think to yourself, well, maybe I can budge in the way that I'm thinking. Or you see it their way. You may not completely agree, but you can actually understand why they believe it to be a certain way. And I think that's when you start getting to true empathy, when you're in a conflict.
Yes, thank you. And like Mark said in the comments here, shouldn't a question step be ask the question why the other person feels the way you do? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
To Dr. Horn's point,
Mm-hmm.
asking the why. Well, why do you feel this
Yeah.
way? So thank you, Mark, for putting that comment there as well. Because that's the purpose of these gatherings in this comment. We're sharing with one another, we're growing with one another. So thank you for the feedback. And feel free if you feel like, hey, TJ, Dr. Horn, you left this out, add it. Iron sharpens iron here. All righty, so we have another poll for you. Don't you gotta love the questions? Employees in United States companies spend approximately how many hours each week involved in conflict? So take the time to fill the poll out. How much time are we actually wasting on conflict when we can move through conflict a little bit faster and more efficiently? Go ahead and start populating the chat with that. I would love to see what you guys come up with.
5 hours is actually an option. Wow. Does this include like when you yell at a coworker in your head, but don't actually verbalize? Then I think
Yeah,
those
those,
10.
Candace, internal conflicts count because sometimes we have a whole dialogue going on mentally, depending on the environment. Those toxic cultures, oh, they're rough. And I think that's why it's so important that we resolve things, address them quickly, because you don't want your entire culture where you work to become so toxic that you can't get anything done because everybody's hanging out at the cooler talking about all the gossip and the tea. Did you hear what such and such? You lose time with a lot of conflict too. So depending on what it is, we have to communicate and address. So how are we looking? Ooh,
We'll give everybody like 10 more seconds.
Bet Zeta said 10 hours. Ooh, we need to go there and do some work. All right.
Okay, I'll push up the results now. This is interesting.
Okay. All right.
3 hours.
Half of you said 3 hours. Actually, 28% said 5, and one said 1 hour, and one said 5.7. Those 30 minutes, folks, those are definitely our collaborators there. And the actual answer is 2.8 hours, rounded up to 3 hours. So most of you got that one right. So thank you. Great job, But if you look at it, out of a week, that's still a lot of time in conflict. So like I say, conflicts are going to occur, but let's see if we can work through them a little bit faster, a little bit more efficiently. Next slide, please. Okay, so now let's talk about active listening skills. And when you go to get educated on being a therapist, you have to go through hours and hours and hours of learning how to listen to people, and we have to record ourselves doing it. So you just want to make sure you're fully engaged in a conversation. Don't clear your mind. Don't be in other places on your grocery list. What you're going to do when you get home. So limit distractions. So oftentimes we're looking at phones. We're looking at other emails, we're checking all these multiple devices. So just make sure that you're showing the other person that you really care and you're concerned when you limit the distractions and disconnecting from those other things. Nonverbal cues. Now, I know if they're saying something that you don't necessarily agree with, you're not going to give them the north and south, but it's other ways that you can give nonverbal cues, like maybe just change your body language a little bit to show that you're engaged, and if you agree, if there is some congruence, sure, you can do the north and south, but sometimes we can't, in my world, but make sure you're providing those. Eye contact is important, but don't stare, with your arms folded. Imagine me sitting here looking at you like that. That's pretty intimidating. You're not trying to agree with me. You're trying to put a hole in my head, so eye contact is important, but don't stare with your arms crossed. Be neutral and open, like you're open to working through whatever situation that you're dealing with. And paraphrase back what was said. So when you're asking those questions, so you just said that it bothers you when I don't include you as a person who supported this particular project. And I understand where you're coming from, and I need to make sure that I give you credit where credit's due. Whatever the conversation is, you make sure that you're repeating what they said to show that you are actually paying attention, And finally, listen to understand rather than to respond. Okay. So some of our more competitive types, we're just working to get that next answer fired out. We're not paying attention. We're just thinking like, oh, I'm gonna come with this. I got a bazooka, I got a grenade, and that's not helpful. Like I said, let's keep the healthy competition where it belongs. So, just make sure that you are listening to understand. And I'm going to pause right there to see if anybody else on the panel has anything in addition to add to that, or in the chat, do you have anything addition to add?
I'll just say that Dr. Horn, speaking of like technical things, just had to step off for a moment, but she'll be right back. Okay. So, technical things do happen, but it'll be all good. I'm fascinated by the Q&A in the chat. Because truthfully, I've done a bunch of these webinars, obviously, and I think this is the most active chat in Q&A I've ever seen.
They all rock, that's why. And Mark, put it in a parking lot. If we can't get to everything right now, let's put it in a parking lot. We can use a sticky note, we can use Microsoft Note, whatever tool you have, put it in that parking lot, but make sure you go back to the parking lot, otherwise somebody's gonna go steal it, right? So make sure you are going back to it. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, because I want to save some time for Q&A. I want this to be an open discussion, give you all time to ask for feedback too. It may be something that you're going through. Of course, we're not going to use names. You don't even have to use your organization, but I want to make sure we have that time. So now we're going to talk about how do we de-escalate situations when they get heated, when words are exchanged. I'll tell you, I've had a very colorful career. And at one point when I was in electronics and engineering, I was in a blue collar role, and their conflict could get physical sometimes. They never did get physical with me. I would be that person definitely sitting back, eating the popcorn, just observing. But if you don't de-escalate, in the wrong instances, people can get physical, jump across tables, yell, just get out of hand. And depending on the culture of your work, sometimes it's permissible, like, hey, go around there, you guys work things out. Next day, they're talking about their wife's, succotash or something. You never know. People deal with things that crazy. I've seen it all, so, but we're going to be civil. Like one of our founding fathers, George Washington, said, I'm going to write out these civility rules here for us to go by. So, first off, lower the tone and pace of your voice. If you're loud and fast, I'm in fight mode. Forget flight. I'm not going anywhere. I'm in fight mode right now. So in order to get out of that fight or flight, which is not healthy, we'll talk about, I've talked about that in other sessions. You don't want to bald and have this big gut because you're building up all this cortisol. It's not healthy. If you want to keep your youth and then be healthy, live a healthy life, it's not worth it. So lower your tone and pace of voice. Avoid offensive hand gestures like you pointing or doing little things to show like your body language is bucking up at people, So you just want to, like we said on the previous slide, take a deep breath, you calm down, you're thinking about that happy hour you're going to go to after this, whatever you have to do to switch your mindset. Acknowledge the views and the opinions of the other person. Acknowledge it. What do we do here in government that's so conflicting that we can't even acknowledge our colleague? We're not for profit. You're not going to get fired if you don't sell 500 hamburgers for the USDA. We don't do work like that, So, and it's not commission, we just have to justify budgets on that side. But beyond that, it's no reason why we can't cooperate and be collaborative with one another. Request for one person to speak at a time. Set that ground rule from the beginning. And if you have a contentious relationship with somebody, because some of you do, some of you have worked together for years and that person just gets under my skin. Back in I've been in places that they'd be like, 10 years ago, we were like, I'm like, hold up, 10 years ago. Okay, so sometimes we have to let things go. Don't hoard on, let's be very present, don't live in your past. Give everybody a chance to evolve. Evolution occurs in people every day. We change, I'm just going to sidetrack there. Think about family members who still consider you that's not those kids you were years ago. You've evolved, you've leveled up, but they're still holding you accountable for the time you threw a rock at their head, okay? So it's the same in the workplace. We're all evolving. Some of us are going to counseling and doing martial arts and Tai Chi or whatever it is. So, acknowledge them. So take the time, request for one person to speak at a time, and defer on that judgment and blame. Well, you did this and you did that, and you just outright blaming them instead of seeking to understand their perspective. Seek to understand, like we discussed before. Gonna pause there for any additional comments from the panel. Let's see what Ali said. There are a lot of good ideas shared here, but how do you account for difference in communication style that may be cultural because of neurodiversity? Is the expectation always on those people to adapt to dominate culture? No, absolutely not. Neurodiversity is diversity. So we all deal with things different culturally, like I spoke of before. So in these instances, when you handle and deal with things differently, like I noticed when I was in Italy one time, people use more hand gestures and the kids were passionate. I loved it, the way they talked. It just made me radiate to see how they communicated. And that was normal to them. I've gone to certain dinner tables where people are more aggressive. Instead of passing rolls, they threw them. It's like, go deep, pop, you get hit in the head. Everybody, they're different, So I think the best way in that, when you're having those team building exercises without giving up your whole HIPAA and medical history, just say, hey, I handle things differently, but I don't mean any harm. I come in peace, So you just have to have those candid conversations. Otherwise, it's more like everybody has this expectation of you falling within this certain norm. But we know that there's norming, and being normal is not necessarily normal. So great question, Ali. Thank you for sharing. But it has to be a little bit of self-disclosure if you want somebody to respect you, to say, hey, when I get free with these hands, could you see me doing it? No offense. If I slip up and point, I'm sorry, let me put that finger away, because culturally that may not be good for this culture, that culture, but you have to communicate those things. Next slide, please. Okay, so the question is asked, what's the consequences of too much? And what if you're too empathetic, right? In the workplace or, personally, if you're always just on that conflict style of you're just always accommodating. You're accommodating everything and everyone but yourself on the projects. You have a colleague to come, oh, you did a great job on that presentation. Can I present it? Sure. I don't see why not. Yeah. Everything that comes up, you're just always, you're empathetic, you're just catering everybody. So you can get emotionally exhausted and burn out, especially on a personal level. If you are that family member that's always doing for others and you're not taking that time to care for yourself. So, the inability to draw those boundaries, and you're too empathetic now, you're not drawing those boundaries of no, this is how this has to be because of X, Y, Z. No, I can't do this at this time because I have these other things. If it's your supervisor, of course, you don't want to give them always the no. It's the yes, and can you give me a little bit additional time because I actually have these other things going on too. And if I do them all, I'm going to have a nervous breakdown and you're not going to have me for about 6 months because I'm going to go on a sabbatical to Tahiti. Now, just saying. But you have to make sure you put those boundaries in place. We're only one person, and we can only do so much in a day. But if you need additional time to do things, even when you're drawing those boundaries, you have to communicate that. And when people first give you a task, and you have to say, that's a little bit unrealistic for me right now because I have these things going on. Whereas sometimes if you're too empathetic, you won't say it. You'll just take it in. You'll feel privileged that you're getting all of this responsibility. But it's not necessarily good because no one human can handle all of that. And people will dump. They will continue to dump on you. They will dump until they can't dump no more, okay? So you have to draw those boundaries. So it's an increased risk of compassion fatigue. You're trying to take on everything and everybody. Therapists, we have an increased risk of compassion fatigue because if you sit, that's why I'm not operating at capacity and I'm in the government world right now. That's a second transition out. You listen to problems all day long, you're going to get burnt out. If you are accepting things all day long, you're going to get burnt out. It's human nature. You can only take so much. So you have to take that time to decompress. Those hobbies, those things you love doing, golf and the tennis, the fishing, whatever you like to do, the art, make sure you're taking time to decompress to prevent that risk of compassion fatigue. And eventually it will limit your potential. People aren't seeing you because everybody is taking credit for what you do. You're not getting opportunity to be creative, the creative person that you were intended to be. Because after a while, then now I'm becoming a pessimist. You know, I feel like all of my efforts are thwarted because it's all in how you're communicating. And you have to communicate a lot, communicate effectively, state the why, stick to the facts, and communicate your time and your boundaries. I'm going to pause there to see if anyone wants to add to that. So Wendy said, I feel like I have empathy when a conflict is happening, but often I still go home and stew out about things that were said. How can I solve that problem? So you go home and you feel like you still stew, you know, you ruminate for a little while, you know, and rumination could take us out, you know, and I think you just have to focus on that, you know, being present. You know, I read a lot of us read books about just being present and in the now, and then learning how to mentally transition. You know, that mental transition is very, very important. I'm going to keep going because I want to give you guys time for some open dialogue and questions here. Take a pause. Dr. Horn, if you want to jump in and say anything. If not, let's go ahead and keep going. I think we're here to our last poll question is, in 2009, the average U.S. college student reported feeling less empathetic than what percentage of students 3 decades earlier? So 3 decades earlier was way back. You know, American culture was very different back then. So how much
This is an
percentage?
interesting question.
Yeah, how much percentage did you think empathy dropped over the years? Now, this was a ways back, and empathy is on a rise through a lot of more social media attention, or just people learning about boundaries, people learning, you know, just to kind of care. Empathy's on a rebound, but for years it was declining and declining and declining.
But you're right, it's a different world.
It is a different world.
Dr. Horn hasn't been able to come back yet. She had some technical issues. So, but there are a good number of questions. So once it's time for questions, you'll have no shortage of things to respond to.
No, definitely. All right. Is the poll just about wrapped up here?
Yeah, I'll do the results now. 50% is the, well, 50 and 25% are the most common. It's basically the same.
Yeah. And the actual answer is 75%. It was a 75%. Yeah. 75% students felt less empathetic than 3 decades earlier. So that's a heavy, heavy decline in empathy. So, but now, like I say, present time, it is definitely on a rise. It's definitely not where it used to be years ago. Compassion is dropping, empathy is dropping, all of those basic things about our culture, it's changing. And I think that was our last question there. But now we're talking about when empathy is not enough. What if, okay, I'm empathetic, I'm doing the right things. And I see some of you putting that in the chat. I'm trying to do everything to resolve conflict sensibly. I'm doing what I have to do, but it does not seem like it's enough. What do I need to do? And I would say in those instances, you know, seek professional development. Sometimes you may be in the wrong area. You know, sometimes we're prompted to be in the field we are in by family pressures, different things going on. You may not be happy where you are, or you may feel like you need a detail opportunity or something different. Just develop yourself, keep training. So seek opportunities for professional development. Seek counseling. You know, sometimes things can get so heated at work and it causes an enormous amount of stress to where when we go home, we can't let go. We ruminate, Now we're not enjoying our dog, our evening, our family, nobody, because work has just gotten under our skin due to conflicts, and you feel like you just can't win. Sometimes you feel that way. And most, at every level of the government, you have an employee assistance program. Like on the federal side, you get like 10 to 12 free sessions that you can go through that's confidential. They can't go back and tell your supervisor or colleagues that, oh, she's, nothing like that. You go in and you talk about things, and it's confidential. The only time that we have to mandatory reporting is if it's, danger to self and others. But other than that, you can go in and say, I need help here because I feel like this environment is toxic. I'm doing the best I can. I can't work anywhere else right now because XYZ, but I need to work on myself. And request support from other colleagues or supervisors. Sometimes the people around you can be of assistance. You can say, hey, I'm in this situation right now. What techniques would you recommend? Or if your supervisor is a problem, seek a mentor or somebody else that can kind of help you through. Or maybe you need a mediator or an arbitrator, depending on what line you're in, when you're having some of these discussions, just to try to mitigate the conflict so that you can get through. Now, some work, it behooves us to get through conflict. I know when I worked in IT for years, you can't get things into development if you can't agree upon things. When you work in engineering, it's the same thing. When you work in policy, it's the same thing. Whatever you're doing, you're administering benefits. If you can't get through something, we can't deliver this to the populations that we serve. We can't build this platform. We can't build this bridge. We can't issue these funds. Whatever we're doing, we can't do if we can't get over ourselves. So, we really have to take those opportunities to get over ourselves. And that's the last slide. And this is the time that we're going to open it up for questions. I did leave you some book recommendations that you can refer back to, of course, as always. Take the time, read, education and learning. It's continuous and ongoing. So just definitely make sure that you're taking the time to develop.
And this PowerPoint is should be in the resource section of your console. So if you want to spend a little time and look at the book recommendations, then feel free to do that. But welcome back, Dr. Horn. I did mention that you had some technical issues because like webinars are live. So
yep.
but we have some great questions. So not to just throw you on the spot, but I thought, I don't know if you want to answer this one. Any tips for dealing with passive aggressive coworkers? I think everybody has dealt with at least one. When I saw that question, I could think of like 3 people I had dealt with who were passive aggressive in the past. So do either of you, Dr. Horn, I don't know if you want to start, or TJ, do you want to speak to it? But what do you do when you have a passive aggressive colleague who's just giving you tremendous agita?
I think it's a great question, because the first thing that I would say to realize is that you can only control what you can control, right? So you can't control the behaviors of the other person that you're in conflict with. So that's why I say, really policing our own behavior and how we show up in the space first. But it could be helpful to let the person know that they may be coming across as passive aggressive. But do that with a little bit of caution, only because if it doesn't involve you, then it could come across as you creating the conflict. And so that's how a person may view it. If it didn't involve you, but you see they're in conflict with someone else and you think they're being passive aggressive, they may say, well, this doesn't pertain to you. This doesn't involve you. And then it could be looked at as you trying to start conflict with that person. So I would say do it cautiously, but at the end of the day, focus less on how other people's behavior is in conflict and more around how you show up in the space and whether you're open to hear where they're coming from. So asking a lot of questions, a lot of probing questions, if you're the person that's involved in the conflict. If it's happening with someone else and maybe you have a good relationship with this person who you believe is being passive aggressive, then that may be an opportunity for you to pull them aside to say, hey, I don't know if you know that you may come across this way, but, this is what I'm seeing from the outside looking in as a friend or as someone who you work with, but you can take it or leave it. Those are ways that you can pretty much work with a person who may come across as passive aggressive.
There's another question here. How can, among many questions, I should say, how can you address, okay, I'm sorry, try again. How can you address how to stop attributing negative motivations to others' actions in order to be empathetic? So in other words, I think the question is, if you're attributing negative motivations to when people do stuff, how do you stop doing that in order to be more empathetic? Because I think it's human nature. If somebody is bothering you, it's very easy to say they're doing this because they're purposely trying to bother me or make my life hard or whatever. But that's not necessarily true. It's just your interpretation. And you may be, I think this is the question. You may be being unfair to somebody else. So how do you get beyond that?
I would first say, just quickly, turn over Dr. Horn, is the best conflict resolution advice I got in a class I took was assume positive intent.
Mm-hmm.
Which is hard.
Initially, so give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm reading a lot of these comments because it sounds like a lot of us deal with toxic people, and I'll never forget when I was in this very toxic environment, I went and got a book like How to Deal with Annoying People, and everything in the book talked about me dealing with myself. And it was a slap in the face. I was like, no, I don't want to deal with me. I want to deal with them. But the book was telling me that you can't change people. You have to change how you react to them. I was like, dang it.
Yeah.
So, all right. But I'll turn that back over to Dr. Horn.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. It goes back to what you can control. You can control you. So whether you are consistently looking at the negative, and what people don't realize is how you show up in chaos is how you show up in calm times. You don't change your personality at the core of who you are. So if you're a pessimistic person, a cynical person, a negative who thinks of the negative first, you're typically going to do it in all situations. So that may be something you need to reflect on also, just about yourself, period. Where do I tend to lead with the negative or think that people are typically trying to do something wrong? I've trained a lot of law enforcement officers in my past work, and sometimes that has a trigger for them where it's like, no, I'm keeping myself safe. So I'm always thinking that a person's going to do the wrong thing. Right. But then it bleeds over into their relationships, how they treat their children, right. And so it's hard to shift yourself and change yourself constantly. So I think that's one way to start looking at it. Whereas, am I looking at things negatively across all spectrums of my life? And if so, it's not just about conflict that you need to start really thinking about. It could be, maybe I need to start thinking about my own mindset. Right. On whether I'm, consistently nitpicking the people around me. Am I thinking that people are going to be negative? Do I instantly think something's wrong if someone doesn't do something that I like? I've seen this so often, especially when talking about EEO complaints, where a person will come in and say, this person doesn't say good morning, and I think they don't like me. And you go, wow, okay. So it triggered from one action of, they didn't say good morning one morning. And then that person thought, well, they don't like me, or they heard me and they're ignoring me. And so it follows a thread of whether your mindset is, maybe that person was busy and just didn't hear me, or maybe they were lost in their own thoughts and didn't hear me today. I'm going to go check on them and see if they're okay. Right. Instead of that's a more positive response to maybe something not going the way you wanted it to. And so that's what I would say is really think about your mindset as a whole. If you're consistently going to the negative, then that may be something that you can switch within yourself that could impact your relationships across an entire spectrum.
There's another question, and TJ, a little earlier you mentioned gossiping, but there's a question: how do you address empathy when you're dealing with gossip? Which gossip can, if you're engaging in it, I guess it can be enjoyable, but gossip can really tank morale in an agency. So how do you, if you're dealing with a gossipy sort of environment, how can you be empathetic?
I would say avoid it at all costs. Yeah, avoid gossip to the best of your ability. Stick to work. A lot of people don't have separation. And I just want to add on to what Dr. Horn said here briefly. you have to reset constantly, reset your mind, reset when you take on a new job or a new role, write out what you learned from your last job and you leave it there. You take those skills and lessons that you learned, but you have to constantly do a mental shift, reset, reinvent yourself constantly to avoid falling in these pitfalls, expecting everybody to act like they did in your last organization, or you're still holding on to your last organization, trying to bring that culture into this culture. And now you're upset because you're expecting it to be the same, and it's different. You left that place for a reason. So constantly reset, be it in your current role or your previous role, but when it comes to gossip, just try to avoid it, because the people who are talking all the time are also talking about you. And it maybe leadership needs to communicate a little bit more to stop the gossip. So you can maybe go to a supervisor and say, hey, I'm hearing a lot of this. At our next all hands, can we discuss this? Because now we're losing productivity because everybody's talking about all of these rumors and things because maybe we're not getting enough communication. So work that up the chain a little bit, communicate up, manage up, and let them know that, hey, we need some clarity around this because it's causing a lot of gossip. But you don't have to partake. It's nothing on your employee objectives to say that you have to participate in gossip. Opt out. That's what I do. Don't have time.
Yeah.
I really don't.
And I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Horn.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I would also just empower folks to stop it in its tracks. Like, when someone comes to you to tell you a story about what someone else had happened to them or what's going on in the manager's office, stop them there and say, hey, I don't think we should be spreading that because that could be, untrue, or it'll come back to us. So, maybe we shouldn't be talking about that. And so a lot of it is, a step between you being an ally for someone else, right? If there's people that they're gossiping about, that could harm them and hurt them and create conflict in an environment of toxicity around you. And so, I would just empower folks to really be an ally in those situations. If you're hearing gossip about a person, then you probably should step in and protect that person, because it could, harm them in the future, but then also create a toxic environment. If it's gossip about what's happening at the organization, then that's another thing to say, hey, we don't know that. Maybe we should go talk to our supervisor, or maybe we need to ask our manager about that in the next meeting. But that's one of those things where, again, take the control over what you can. And when you see things happening in the workplace that are not proper behavior or, in line with your values, then it's okay to stand up and say, hey, I don't think we should be doing this. Or protect those people around you, even if you don't know them. If the person's name is being spread about whatever it could be, stay true to your values, your individual and personal values in the workplace.
I just realized that we are almost out of time. So if each of you could just sort of like sum up, just your general takeaway for everybody in say like 30 seconds or so, or whatever. That would be really awesome. So whichever of you wants to go first is fine. But what just, people walking away from this, I think this has been an awesome conversation. What do you want people, the top thing you want them to remember or keep in mind when they sign off today?
I would say, main takeaway, to control what you can control, right? When you're talking about empathy, you can control how you react to that. And I know that there was a question that chat around if people are born with empathy, or is this something that you have to learn? And I would say that it is something that every person can have. Not everyone has, high empathy, low empathy. That's all tied to your experiences and how you grow up and the trauma or things that you've gone through that can change the way you view the world. But we all have the capacity to have empathy. And so I would tell you to, really look at how you show up in conflict, really focus on self versus focusing on the other person. Because typically when you work on self, you end up being in a situation where a conflict is controlled and healthy. right? Because you know when to opt out, you know when it's getting unhealthy, you know when it's getting inappropriate, and then you're able to control yourself and opt out of that conflict at that time. So a lot of it is self-actualization, self-awareness, and then holding yourself to your own values and ethics when dealing with other people.
That's awesome. TJ, your final thoughts?
Sure. I would say that people aren't necessarily naturally born with empathy, I wasn't naturally empathetic. You know, my counseling style is definitely more CBT, cognitive based. So I don't always empathize, but you can learn tools to empathize with people more, research empathy mapping. You can apply that even to your colleagues. Just know that it's hard in the workplace. It is hard. We spend the best amount of our days at work, and it can be so draining. You know, somebody wrote, what do I do about the people who's always, you know, reporting on everybody else? You're going to have those informants, as I call them. And if you're an informant, that's fine. But just understand that you're not getting paid to be the informant. Be friendly. So when it comes to addressing conflict, address it. Don't be an avoidant, because it's going to build up and then you're going to go home and ruminate, and that's going to manifest in other ways into your health. So I'm all about protecting health, your total being. If you stay mission focused on what we're here to do, whatever mission you have, and less personal focus on just the people, I think we can get through things together more efficiently. But when we make everything about self and what we want or think things should be, we understand that, hey, there's no normal, there's no common, that we have to learn one another, that if we want people to understand and appreciate who we are, even if we do have neurodivergent tendencies like I do, okay, I chase butterflies, you know, we still have to communicate those things and leverage our differences to better ourselves. Like, hey, you know, I know that I'm all over the place, so I always oversee operations. I'm a good operator, you know, because I can spin the plates, you know. So leverage your differences to get somewhere where it best suits you. And when you get there, you're going to find those other like-minded people that you can grow and thrive with. So make sure you're in the right place, that you're not a knife trying to be a spoon. And then secondly, try to understand how to appreciate your colleagues to get through your day-to-day to the best of your ability. It's not going to be perfect. There's going to be some rough days. Have somebody to lean on, you can talk to, but don't ruminate. Don't stay there, because I want what's best for you all. And I really, really, truly appreciate what everybody's doing here. And thank you for your time and attention today.
This has been wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you, for the conversation. We are actually over time, but I just want to, before everybody goes, I just do have a few quick reminders. So like I said, check your inbox on Thursday morning, because we're going to send you a link to the entire session on demand. Check out the resources tab, or the resources on your console, because among other things, the presentation should be here, and you'll be able to check out that one last slide with the reading list TJ offered. And just on behalf of GovLoop, NextGen, and our 2024 NextGen Alliance partners, Gov White Papers, American University, and WEPA, we really hope you enjoyed today's training. I know I did. I know a whole bunch of kitchenware references. I never heard of spinning plates before. And anyway, so we hope you all have a really wonderful day. Thank you so much for being here. Bye-bye, everyone.